was used to refer Nuestra Señor, while some historical sources may have used the terms Ethiopian and Blackamoor interchangeably, particularly in European contexts. Here's why. Semitic Negus. Ethiopian not only refers to people from the country of Ethiopia, which is a diverse nation in East Africa with a rich and unique history, culture, and numerous ethnic groups. A blackamoor is a term with complex and often problematic origins, primarily in European decorative arts and literature, that historically referred to dark-skinned people, particularly those from North Africa, or those depicted in an exotic or stylized manner. The term and its associated imagery are now widely considered outdated and culturally insensitive due to their ties to colonialism, slavery, and racial stereotypes. In historical contexts, Ethiopian was Semitic Negus, sometimes used by Europeans as a broader term for black Africans, but this usage doesn't align with the specific national and cultural identity of Ethiopians. The term blackamoor, meanwhile, became particularly prominent in European decorative arts to depict stylized figures often associated with servitude or exoticism. Therefore, it's important to differentiate between the two terms and recognize the distinct cultural and historical meanings they carry. Historical context. The term became widespread in European decorative arts and heraldry during the early modern and colonial periods. Blackamoor art often depicted stylized figures of black people, sometimes in exotic or high-status clothing, used to hold objects like candles. Connotation. Today, the term is widely viewed as racist and culturally insensitive due to its associations with slavery, colonialism, and the objectification of black people. Negro Semitic Negus. Origin. Negro is derived from the Spanish and Portuguese word for the color black, which itself comes from the Latin word neger. Historical context. The term was widely used during the transatlantic slave trade to refer to black Africans, not Ethiopians. It was considered a common, and for a time, proper term for African Americans not Ethiopian through the mid-20th century. Connotation. Due to its association with slavery and segregation, the term fell out of favor during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. In modern English, it is widely considered a deeply offensive and outdated racial slur. Linguistic origin. The term Semitic originally referred to a group of languages, including Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, and Akkadian. It is not a racial classification, but a linguistic one, though it has been historically and erroneously used in a racial context. Diverse Semitic peoples. Numerous peoples speak, or historically spoke, a Semitic language. This group includes Arabs, Assyrians, Babylonians, Phoenicians, and ancient Canaanites. Considering the large populations of Arabic speakers alone, Israelites make up only a small fraction of all Semitic peoples. The repeated accounts of Semitic people being expelled from various regions in Africa and Asia stem from a complex history of political instability, forced assimilation by larger empires, and centuries of persecution based on spiritual religious ethnicity. The Israelites of the Northern Kingdom were scattered across the empire, with their language and alphabet as evidence of assimilation. These Semitic people can be seen alphabetically adapted into numerous cultures across the Mediterranean and the Near East, thanks to the Phoenicians' extensive maritime trade network. The alphabet's efficiency helped drive a surge in literacy that fundamentally changed how these societies communicated and recorded information. Greek city-states before Christ, 722 BCE. The alphabet, the Greeks borrowed the Phoenician alphabet around the 9th or 8th century BCE. Inscriptions like the Dipylon inscription and the text on Nestor's cup from the late 8th century BCE confirm its early adoption. Innovation of vowels. The Greeks made a critical adaptation by using some of the letters for vowels, a feature missing from the original Phoenician consonantal alphabet abjad. This innovation created the first complete alphabet. Legacy. The Greek alphabet became the ancestor of virtually all modern European writing systems, including the Latin alphabet. Italian peninsula, before Christ, 722. Etruscans. Around the 8th century BCE, the Etruscans of central Italy adopted a Western Greek version of the Phoenician alphabet. Inscriptions like those on the Marsiliana tablet show an early Etruscan abecedarium. The Romans in turn, adapted the Etruscan script, creating the Latin alphabet, which then spread throughout Europe and beyond, with the expansion of the Roman Empire. Near East, before Christ, 722. Aramaic, the Aramean people, whose language was the lingua franca of the Neo-Assyrian, Neo-Babylonian, and Persian empires, adopted and adapted the Phoenician alphabet around the 9th century BCE. Hebrew and Arabic. The Aramaic script became the basis for the modern Hebrew alphabet, also called the square script, and later the Arabic alphabet. Other Canaanite scripts, the Phoenician alphabet, also gave rise to other Iron Age scripts in the region, including those used for Moabite, Ammonite, and Edomite. Iberian Peninsula, before Christ, 722. A Paleo-Hispanic scripts. The various Paleo-Hispanic scripts of ancient Spain and Portugal were derived, at least in part, from the Phoenician alphabet, with some showing influence from the Greek alphabet as well. These scripts were used to write the Iberian language and were partly syllabic and partly alphabetic. North Africa, before Christ 722. Carthage, as the most powerful Phoenician colony. Carthage continued to use the Phoenician script, known as the Punic alphabet, until the 2nd century BCE. The numerous votive inscriptions found in Carthage demonstrate the widespread use of the script in this region. Wider diffusion before Christ 722. Through later developments of the Greek and Aramaic scripts, the influence of the Phoenician alphabet extended far beyond these initial adopters. Subsequent scripts, including Syriac, Mongolian, and the Brahmic scripts of India, are thought to have their origins in the Phoenician-derived Aramaic alphabet. Settled in cities of Media and along the Habor River, among other places. The deported Israelites were then exposed to the cultures and religions of their new neighbors, which led to their gradual assimilation. The biblical account of the 10 lost tribes refers to the tribes from the northern kingdom who were never heard from again as a distinct group. Northern kingdom's Israelites would have been assimilated, along with their alphabet, linguistic Semitic ancestral traditions, and deities in refugee from the Mesopotamia expulsions under the Assyrian name. Empire, Mesopotamia. Before Christ 722. Expansion and administration under King Sargon II. The Assyrian Empire was at its apex, controlling all of Mesopotamia and parts of modern-day Turkey and Iran. Technological innovation. The Assyrians were pioneers in military technology, using large-scale cavalry and advanced siege techniques to maintain control over a vast and diverse empire. A psychological warfare. The empire employed terror tactics and mass deportation to discourage resistance and assimilate conquered peoples. Kingdom of Judah before Christ 722. A vassal state following the destruction of its northern neighbor, Judah became a cautious vassal of the Assyrian Empire. Its king, Hezekiah, would later rebel, leading to an Assyrian siege of Jerusalem in 701 BCE. Influx of refugees. The fall of Israel led to an influx of refugees into Judah, significantly increasing Jerusalem's population and altering its social dynamics. Egypt before Christ 722. Internal strife. During this period, Egypt was under the control of the 25th dynasty, a Nubian, Kushite, Ethiopian dynasty. The region was divided, with different rulers for power. Conquest by Assyria. While Egypt was a major regional power, it would eventually be conquered by the Assyrians under King Esarhaddon, a few decades later in 671 BCE Greece and the Mediterranean. Greek city-states before Christ, 722. Archaic period. The Greek city-states were in the midst of their archaic period. This era was characterized by increased trade, the colonization of the Mediterranean, and the development of the polis city-state. Emergence of Sparta and Athens. The foundations of the powerful city-states of Athens and Sparta were being laid. Their distinctive social and political systems were still in their formative stages. Early Olympic Games. The Olympic Games were well established by this time, providing a cultural and athletic focal point for the Greek world. Italian Peninsula before Christ 722. A rise of Rome in the city-state of Rome. The period of the kings was underway. While a small local power, Rome was slowly consolidating its control over surrounding territories, eventually laying the foundation for its future expansion. Etruscan power. The Etruscan civilization dominated much of the Italian peninsula, particularly the central regions. They were highly influential on early Roman culture and political development. East Asia. Zhou dynasty. China before Christ 722. Spring and autumn period. China was still ruled by the Zhou dynasty. However, the king's power was beginning to wane, and regional lords became increasingly autonomous. This period of political fragmentation and conflict is known as the Spring and Autumn period, which began in 771 BCE. Philosophical development. This political instability would eventually fuel a period of great philosophical thought, though figures like Confucius and Lao Tzu would emerge later in the century. Americas around 722 BCE. Zapotec civilization in the Oaxaca, capital of San Jose Mogote, emerging as a sophisticated ceremonial and political center. Their cultural and religious practices were deeply intertwined and centered on an ancient Semitic polytheistic belief system connected to agriculture, fertility, and ancestry. Mesoamerica. Zapotec civilization. The Zapotec civilization in the valley of Oaxaca was developing and flourished in the area that is now Oaxaca, Mexico. Olmec influence. Further north, the Olmec civilization was in decline, but its cultural innovations, including writing and pyramid building, had a lasting influence on subsequent Mesoamerican cultures. Horn of Africa, before Christ 722. Prosperous trade. In what is now modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, The Kingdom of Dempt was a regional power involved in a thriving trade network, particularly in ivory, with connections across the Red Sea to South Arabia. Indigenous development. While influenced by South Arabia, the kingdom was developing its own indigenous culture, language, and agriculture. The southern kingdom of Judah endured until the Babylonian exile in 586 BCE. The descendants of the exiled Judeans, who eventually returned, continued to be called Jews. Not all Israelites became Jews, because the 10 northern tribes of Israel are not bloodline of Judah not. All ancient Israelites became modern Jews. The Judaic people of today primarily trace their lineage back to the tribes of the southern kingdom, particularly Judah. A broader identity. The term Israelite refers to all descendants of Jacob, also called Israel, encompassing all 13 tribes. The term Jew applies to the descendants of Judah and those who joined them, which is a subgroup of the ancient Israelites. The later Roman Crusades would be fined the lost tribes of Israel, or northern kingdom, before Christ 722 BCE. Deportation of Israelites. Sargon II claimed to have deported 27,290 Israelites to various parts of the Assyrian Empire, including what is now northern Syria and Iran. A resettlement of foreigners, the Assyrians then repopulated the territory of Israel with other conquered peoples. This strategy, known as forced resettlement, aimed to dilute the local population's ethnic and religious identity. Consequences and legacy. The Assyrian conquest of 722 BCE had profound and lasting consequences. End of the northern kingdom. The kingdom was destroyed, and its territory was transformed into an Assyrian province called Samaria. The 10 lost tribes. The Assyrian policy of scattering the conquered people throughout their empire led to the assimilation of most of the deported Israelites, giving rise to the legend of the 10 lost tribes. Origin of the Samaritans. The remaining Israelite population in the region intermarried with the foreign peoples brought in by the Assyrians. This new mixed population, known as the Samaritans, eventually developed a distinct religious tradition. A survival of Judah. In contrast to the fate of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah survived the Assyrian conquest, although it too would later be conquered by the Babylonians. Conclusion. Statement correctly identifies the distinctions between Jews, Israelites, and Semitic peoples. Not all Israelites became Jews after the split of the kingdoms, and Jews constitute a small portion of the larger family of Semitic-speaking peoples. The term Semitic refers to a family of languages and includes groups like the ancient Akkadians and Phoenicians, as well as modern Hebrew and Arabic-speaking populations. In the context of expulsions, the term is most often associated with Israelites of the southern area, known to be Judaic from the tribal land of the people of Judea colony territories, who have experienced a history of diaspora and persecution. Historical migrations and forced resettlement. Assyrian policy 8th century BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, pioneered the policy of mass deportation, removing conquered populations like the Israelites from their homelands and resettling them throughout the empire to break their national identity and prevent rebellion. The lost tribes of Israel emerged from this policy. A Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE. After conquering the kingdom of Judah, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, led by Nebuchadnezzar, deported much of Jerusalem's elite population to Babylon. This marked a major turning point for the Jewish people, though many were eventually able to return. Roman destruction of Judea, 1st and 2nd centuries CE. Following the Judaic to Roman wars, the Roman Empire destroyed Jerusalem's second temple and expelled many Jews from Judea. This event intensified the Jewish diaspora, scattering large Jewish populations across the Roman world, including to North Africa. Phoenician colonization. Semitic-speaking Phoenician traders were actively colonizing the coasts of North Africa during this period. Founding of Carthage. The city of Carthage in modern Tunisia was founded by Phoenicians around 814 BCE. By 722 BCE, it was a burgeoning commercial hub, not a kingdom of Moors. Influence on Berbers. The Phoenicians had significant interactions with the local Berber populations, introducing them to new agricultural and trade practices. Roman Mauritania. The term Moor eventually derived from the Latin word Maurus, which the Romans used centuries later to refer to the inhabitants of the province of Mauritania, corresponding to modern Morocco and part of Algeria. This term was not in use in 722 BCE. Islamic expansion. The people who would later become known as the Moors only converted to Islam and invaded the Iberian Peninsula in 711 CE, centuries after the Assyrian conquest. The development of rabbinic traditions during the Roman invasion of Judea was a strategic and theological response to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. Led by figures like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the new rabbinic movement adapted Judaism from a temple-based religion of sacrifices to one centered on prayer, the study of the Torah, and acts of loving kindness, the foundation of Yavne. A pivotal moment in the formation of rabbinic Judaism was the establishment of a new center of learning in Yavne Jamnia. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, according to rabbinic tradition, ben Zakkai, a Pharisee, saw that Jewish resistance to Rome was futile and arranged a daring escape from the besieged city of Jerusalem in a coffin. Negotiation with Vespasian, ben Zakkai is said to have requested permission from the Roman general, later Emperor Vespasian, to establish a new center for Jewish scholarship in Yavne, an act that ensured the continuity of Jewish tradition. A new Sanhedrin, the Academy at Yavne, became the new seat of the Sanhedrin, the central judicial and legislative body of Jewish law. It was composed almost exclusively of Pharisaic scholars who guided the Jewish people in the post-temple era. Redefining worship and religious practice. With the temple destroyed, the Yavne sages focused on creating new religious practices that could be performed anywhere, allowing Judaism to adapt to a decentralized and diasporic existence. A substitution of prayer for sacrifice, referencing the prophet Hosea's teaching, "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Rabbis emphasized prayer as a new form of atonement. This fundamental shift redefined the relationship between the Jewish people and God. Acts of kindness, Gemalot Hasadim. The rabbis elevated the importance of ethical deeds, arguing that acts of loving kindness could also provide atonement for sins, just as the temple sacrifices once had. Centrality of Torah study. The focus shifted from the temple priesthood to the scholarly class of rabbis. Torah study became a primary form of worship and a path to connecting with God, with synagogues and houses of study replacing the temple as the religious and communal hub. Canonizing scripture and shaping law. The rabbis at Yavne also took steps to consolidate Jewish law and scripture, ensuring the tradition would endure for future generations. Compilation of oral traditions under leaders like Gamaliel II, the Yavne Academy began systematically compiling the oral law, which would eventually become the basis of the Mishnah, completed around 200 CE. Addressing sectarianism, the destruction of the temple eliminated the central point of religious contention, allowing the Pharisaic-led rabbinic movement to largely absorb and replace other sects, such as the Sadducees and Essenes. Debate over the Hebrew canon. While the notion of a formal Council of Jamnia that closed the Hebrew Bible canon is now largely discredited by modern scholars, the rabbis of Yavne did engage in ongoing discussions to consolidate Jewish textual traditions in response to early Christianity and other challenges. Advocating for spiritual resistance. Instead of continuing violent political rebellion, rabbinic leaders championed a new form of resistance focused on spiritual and cultural survival. Shift from political to spiritual. The rabbis largely advocated for accommodation with the Roman authorities, believing that violent uprisings were destined to fail and only brought disaster to the Jewish people. A reinterpreting Roman rule to maintain Jewish pride and resilience. Some Babylonian rabbis of the 3rd and 4th centuries CE reinterpreted Roman rule as a complementary and eternal rival to Israel. In this symbolic system, Israel became a spiritual empire, sustained by God, while Rome was its earthly counterpart. The Moorish invasion of Spain. The Moors did not emerge as a distinct group until the Middle Ages. As 7th century CE, Arab armies conquered North Africa and converted many of the native Berber peoples to Islam. 8th century CE, a combined force of Arabs and converted Berbers invaded the Iberian Peninsula in 711 CE. This marked the beginning of Moorish rule in Spain, which lasted until 1492, persecution and religious conflicts. Later expulsions were often driven by religious persecution, as Christian and Islamic empires sought to enforce religious uniformity. The rise of Islam. As Islam expanded throughout the Arabian Peninsula, some Jewish tribes were expelled from Medina. While relations between Muslims and Jews varied throughout the centuries, instances of persecution and expulsion occurred in different Islamic lands. Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, 15th century. The expulsions of Jews from the Iberian Peninsula in 1492 and 1497 led to a large migration of Sephardic Jews to North Africa and the Ottoman Empire. The goal was to destroy national identity and loyalty. Conquered populations, including the Israelites, and later the Judeans, were deported to distant regions within the empire. By dispersing them and resettling them among other conquered peoples, the empires diluted their ethnic and religious identities to prevent rebellion. A cultural absorption. This policy was not aimed at converting deportees to Judaism, but at dissolving their cultural distinctiveness entirely. It was a method to integrate diverse populations into the imperial administrative framework, forcing them to adopt the language, culture, and social structure of the dominant power. Example of Assyria. The Assyrian resettlement of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE, as documented in 2 Kings, was a prime example of this strategy. The deported Israelites were scattered across the Assyrian Empire, leading to the lost tribes who ultimately assimilated into the local populations. Forced conversion in the Middle Ages. The use of forced expulsion to promote conversion was a tactic of later Christian states, notably during the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, where the goal was to eliminate Judaism by coercing Jews into Christianity. The Alhambra Decree 1492, the Catholic monarchs of Spain Ferdinand and Isabella, expelled all Jews from their kingdoms. The purpose was to pressure practicing Jews to convert and prevent them from influencing the conversos Jews who had already converted to Christianity, often under duress to revert to Judaism. Most Jews refused to convert and were expelled. Forced baptisms in Portugal. In 1497, the King of Portugal initially decreed a similar expulsion, but then orchestrated a mass forced baptism of the Jewish population to prevent their departure. This created a large community of new Christians who were forced to hide their Jewish heritage. Conclusion. The historical record does show forced displacement and conversion are more complex. Ancient empires. Forced displacement was used to prevent rebellion and destroy the national identity of conquered peoples, including the Israelites. The goal was to absorb these groups, not convert them. Medieval and early modern Europe, the expulsions from Spain and Portugal were aimed at forcing Israelites of the North Kingdom displacement to convert to Christianity from Islam or ancient Hebraic traditions and consolidating religious uniformity. The conversion of non-Semitic lineages. Rise of modern anti-Semitism towards coverts of Judaism. The Khazars were a Turkic people who established an empire north of the Caucasus Mountains between the 7th and 10th centuries CE. Conversion to Judaism. The Khazar royal house and nobility, under King Bulan, officially adopted Judaism around the 8th or 9th century CE, while it is debated how widespread this conversion was among the general Khazar population. The existence of a Jewish state is historically accepted. Khazar's unique history has attracted much scholarly attention. Their state acted as a buffer between the Byzantine Christian Empire and the Islamic Caliphate, and their conversion to Judaism is seen by many as a geopolitical strategy to remain independent of both powers. Ashkenazi descent in the 20th century, a theory gained some traction, suggesting that Ashkenazi Jews were descended from the Khazars. However, showing that Ashkenazi Jews primarily trace their ancestry to a founding population from the Middle East and southern 20th century, in the 20th century, particularly following the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, renewed anti-Semitism led to the persecution and converted Caucasian to Judaic and Hebrew traditions, and developed their own rabbinical traditions while not being Semitic people. They became a Jewish populations from many Muslim-majority countries across Africa and Asia. The shift from religious anti-Judaism to racial anti-Semitism. This evidence shows that people have joined the Semitic bloodline line through the Jewish community, through a process of assimilation, formal conversion, and adoption of ancient Semitic customs and beliefs. Pre-modern religious persecution. Prior to the rise of modern racial theory, anti-Semitism was largely religious in nature. While converts now, Jewish people faced significant persecution and were at times forced to convert. Their supposed conversion to Jewishness was viewed as a matter of faith rather than biology. In medieval and early modern Christian Europe, a Jew who converted to Christianity was theoretically no longer considered Semitic and was accepted, though often still viewed with suspicion. Ancient Greco-Roman and rabbinic sources. Jewish writers, historians like Josephus, 1st century CE, and Philo of Alexandria, 1st century CE, wrote about conversions, including the notable case of the royal family of Adiabene, who adopted Judaism in the 1st century CE. Roman writers, Roman authors, including Juvenal, Tacitus, and Cassius Dio, also noted the presence of converts and God-fearers sympathizers with Judaism in the Roman world, sometimes with contempt. Rabbinic literature. The Talmud and other rabbinic texts lay out the rules and procedures for formal conversion giur, showing that the process was well established by the Roman and Byzantine periods. These texts record conversions of famous individuals, such as the Roman scholar Onkelos, who created an Aramaic translation of the Torah. Medieval and modern sources. The Khazar Kingdom. Historical texts from the medieval period, such as the Khazar correspondence, indicate that the ruling elite of the Khazar Kingdom in the Caucasus converted to Judaism in the 8th or 9th century. Personal narratives. Over the centuries, many converts have left records of their spiritual journeys. Examples include the 12th century Italian convert Obadiah the Proselyte and the 18th century noble convert Count Portocchi. Archaeological and genetic evidence. Archaeological finds. Inscriptions. Inscriptions found on ancient grave markers and artifacts confirm the existence of converts. An 1,800-year-old grave marker for Jacob the Proselyte was found at the Beit Sherim cemetery in Israel. Ritual objects, inscriptions, and ritual baths, mikvah, have been discovered in diaspora communities, providing physical evidence of the adoption of Jewish practices. Genetic studies. Mixed ancestry. Genetic studies of Jewish populations, particularly Ashkenazi Jews, show a mixture of Middle Eastern ancestry and European genetic contributions. This is consistent with a history of a migratory Jewish male population intermarrying with local non-Jewish women who converted to Judaism, particularly in southern Europe in the early centuries CE. The Lemba people of southern Africa, who have an oral tradition of Jewish ancestry and observe certain Jewish practices, have been found to carry a specific Y chromosome signature associated with the Jewish priestly lineage Kohanim. Evidence for groups that adopted Jewish practices. Abayudaya, the Abayudaya community in Uganda, which converted to Judaism in the early 20th century, has a documented history of joining the Jewish people. Bnei Menashe, this community in northeastern India, which has oral traditions linking it to one of the lost tribes, has been formally converted to Judaism by the chief rabbinate of Israel. Summary: a cumulative history of forced movement. The numerous accounts of expulsions are not isolated events, but part of a long and complex history of displacement, from ancient imperial strategy, later religious and modern political and economic persecution. Semitic peoples, particularly Jewish populations, were repeatedly driven from their homes, leading to a long history of migration and exile across Africa and Asia. Prehistoric Negus. Semitic origin. Negus Neguz is a title from the Ethiopian Semitic languages, derived from the root ngs, meaning to reign. Semitic Negus of Ethiopia ruled before the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel, 722 BCE. The ancient Negus Semitic kingdom in the Horn of Africa, during that period, was Demti, not the later Aksumite kingdom where the title Negus was first used. The legend of Solomon and Makeda. The connection between the royal line of Ethiopia and King Solomon comes from the Kebra Nagast, Glory of Kings, a 14th century Ethiopian national epic. The epic recounts that the Queen of Sheba, whom it calls Makeda, traveled to Jerusalem to visit King Solomon, was converted to Solomonic dynasty religion, and returned to her country pregnant with his son. The lineage, their son, Menelik I, founded the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia. This legendary lineage was used to legitimize the rule of the Ethiopian emperors, with the last to hold the title being Emperor Haile Selassie. Historical context: the Kebra Nagast was written centuries after King Solomon's death, 931 BCE, and the fall of the Northern Kingdom, not during or before those events. Historical facts versus legend. Chronological discrepancy: the Aksumite kingdom, where the title Negus originated, came to power much later, around the 1st century CE. The rulers of the earlier Demt kingdom, 10th-5th century BCE, are largely unknown. Solomon's reign. The biblical narrative places King Solomon's rule over a united kingdom of Israel from approximately 970 to 931 BCE. Fall of Northern Kingdom. The Northern Kingdom of Israel fell to the Neo-Assyrian Empire in 722 BCE, decades after Solomon's reign and centuries before the Aksumites. There is no historical or archaeological evidence from the time of Solomon or the fall of Israel that mentions a Semitic Negus ruling in Ethiopia. Assyrian and Israelite records show no direct contact with the Horn of Africa. Deportation was not the only fate for the population of the Northern Kingdom of Israelite Empire. Assyrian Empire's campaign against Israel occurred in the 8th century BCE. The Roman Empire was not formally established until the 1st century BCE, and it never invaded the kingdom in present-day Ethiopia. Roman forces did clash with the Kingdom of Kush, a different polity further up the Nile. The Aksumite kingdom, where the term Negus was used, rose to power between the 1st century BCE and the 1st century CE. Source: later Jewish texts, including the Midrash, elaborate on the biblical account, claiming the Queen of Sheba was so overwhelmed by Solomon's wisdom and by the miracles of God that she converted to Judaism. A purpose: this tradition served to magnify Solomon's spiritual power by showing how he could convert a powerful and worldly pagan queen to monotheism. Ethiopian Judaism, a tradition among Ethiopian Jews Beta Israel holds that they are descended from Israelites who settled in the region during this period, following the queen's conversion. Conversion to Christianity. Source: the Kebra Nagast, a 14th century Ethiopian national epic, tells of the Queen of Sheba, whom it calls Makeda, visiting Solomon. Narrative: in this account, she converts to the worship of the God of Israel. After having a child with Solomon, Menelik I, she returns home. A later, but connected, part of the narrative explains how Ethiopia eventually became Christian, tracing its roots to this interaction. Influence: this narrative is used to trace the Solomonic lineage of Ethiopian monarchs and legitimize the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church conversion to Islam. A source: in the Islamic tradition, the Queen of Sheba is known as Bilqis. The Quran recounts the story of her visiting the Prophet and King Solomon, after he learned she was a pagan who worshipped the sun. Narrative: in this version, Solomon uses his power including having her throne magically transported to his palace to demonstrate Allah's might. She is persuaded to abandon idolatry and worship the one God. Islamic interpretation. The Quran presents the narrative as a story of monotheistic triumph, in which a pagan ruler's arrogance is humbled by the power and wisdom of a righteous prophet. Terminology. The title Negus King and Negusa, Nagast King of Kings, was used by the Solomonic dynasties in the Horn of Africa, not by earlier Semitic-influenced kingdoms. The earlier Semitic-influenced kingdom in the region was Damed, which existed from roughly the 10th to 5th centuries BCE and had its capital at Yeha. Little is known about its rulers, Negus. The ruler and king of kings you are referring to likely relates to the Aksumite king Ezana, who ruled in the 4th century CE. Ezana was known as King of Kings and presided over a powerful empire. He converted to Christianity in the mid-4th century CE, not before the Roman or Assyrian periods. While Ezana conquered and absorbed the kingdom of Kush, he was never invaded by Rome. In fact, Aksum established a strong trading relationship with the Roman world and was considered one of the 4 great powers of its time. There are many historical, legendary, and modern accounts of encounters with or claims of descent from the lost tribes of Israel. While most are not taken seriously by mainstream historians and scholars, they have played a significant role in Jewish, Christian, and indigenous folklore and history. Early and medieval accounts. Eldad Hadani, 9th century. Narrative. A mysterious Semitic traveler named Eldad Hadani, meaning Eldad from the tribe of Dan, claimed to be from an autonomous Semitic Judaic kingdom in East Africa. Claims he described the 10 tribes, their kings, and their locations, and claimed they lived an isolated, faithful Jewish existence beyond the mythical Sambation River, which ran with rocks and sand 6 days a week and rested on the Sabbath. Influence. Eldad's accounts were widely circulated and inspired Semitic Judaic communities for centuries, giving hope that their scattered brethren were alive and well somewhere in the world. Benjamin of Tudela, 12th century. Narrative. A Judaic traveler named Benjamin of Tudela embarked on a long journey to the Middle East and beyond to document Judaic communities. Findings. He recorded his encounters with various Judaic populations, some of whom he believed were descendants of the lost tribes, in Persia and Arabia. His travel diary, the Book of Travels, became an important document for later searches. David Ravani, 16th century. Narrative. A man claiming to be David from the tribe of Reuben appeared in Europe, saying he was a military leader from a kingdom of the lost tribes. Claims he sought an alliance with Christian powers to take the Holy Land back from the Ottomans. Outcome. His mission ultimately failed, and he died in an Inquisition prison. While many were skeptical of his claims, he briefly inspired hope among Judaic communities and conversos seeking a Jewish savior. Accounts from the Age of Exploration. Antonio de Montesinos, 17th century. Narrative, as mentioned previously, Montesinos, a Portuguese converso, claimed to have found Jewish practicing Native Americans in the Andes. Influence. This story inspired Manasseh ben Israel's book, The Hope of Israel, and fueled the popular Jewish Indian theory in Europe and the Americas. James Adair, 18th century. Narrative. An Indian trader, James Adair, wrote a book, The History of the Indians, listing over 20 supposed similarities between Native American tribes and Jews. Basis for claims, he compared customs related to tribal organization, religious practices and language, fueling further speculation. Modern claims and movements. Benai Manash, northeastern India. Beliefs. This group from the states of Manipur and Mizoram maintains an oral tradition of descent from the tribe of Manasseh. Developments. In 2005, the chief rabbi of Israel ruled that they were descendants of a lost tribe, allowing them to immigrate to Israel after formally converting to Judaism. Lemba people, southern Africa. Beliefs. The Lemba, who speak a Bantu language, have a strong oral tradition of Jewish ancestry and observe several Jewish practices, such as kosher-like dietary laws. Genetic studies, DNA tests in the 1990s, revealed that a significant portion of Lemba men carry the Cohen modal haplotype, a Y chromosome signature typically associated with the priestly Cohen lineage found among Jewish populations. Pashtuns, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Beliefs. Some traditions among the Pashtun people, a large ethnic group in Afghanistan and Pakistan, claim descent from the lost tribes. Supporting evidence. Some tribal names bear resemblance to Israelite names, for example, Yusufzai meaning sons of Joseph, and certain customs mirror Jewish practices. These traditions are generally dismissed by mainstream scholarship, but continue to be a subject of interest. Escapees to Judah. Some Israelites from the northern kingdom fled south to the neighboring kingdom of Judah to escape the Assyrian invasion. This influx of refugees caused Jerusalem's population to swell significantly. Those who remained, some Israelites remained in the former territory of the northern kingdom, particularly in the region of Samaria. Those who were not deported or did not flee to Judah intermarried with foreign peoples whom the Assyrians resettled in the region, ultimately forming the Samaritans. Assimilation. The primary long-term effect of the Assyrian policy was the assimilation of the deported population. Unlike the later Babylonian exiles who were able to maintain a distinct identity, the deported northern tribes largely disappeared as a separate entity, leading to their designation as the 10 Lost Tribes. Northern Kingdom of Israel, in 722 BC, with the fall of its capital, Samaria. The fall of the Kingdom of Israel resulted from a combination of aggressive Assyrian imperial policies, including constant military expansion, the establishment of a demanding vassal system, and mass deportation. These policies exploited Israel's internal instability, ultimately leading to its destruction and transformation into an Assyrian province. Military expansion and intimidation. Assyrian expansionism in the 8th century BCE was driven by a need for resources and control of trade routes, putting it on a collision course with Israel. Intense warfare. Assyrian warfare was notoriously brutal. They developed advanced military technologies, such as siege engines, and used terror tactics to intimidate opponents into submission. A constant tribute demands. Assyrian kings launched near-annual military campaigns to maintain control and collect tribute from conquered states. When Israel under kings like Menahem and Hoshea failed to meet these demands or attempted rebellion, it provoked a swift and devastating military response. Assyrian conquest of Israel around 722 BCE, as well as significant archaeological evidence. The event is a cornerstone of ancient Near Eastern history. The defeat of the Northern Kingdom of Israel was a multi-stage process spanning several decades and involving multiple Assyrian kings. Besides Sargon II's records, accounts from his predecessors, particularly Tiglath-Pileser III and Shalmaneser V, also document key phases of the conflict. Shalmaneser V reigned 727 to 722 BCE. While no historical records of Shalmaneser V's reign have been found, other chronicles mention his role in the fall of Israel. A Babylonian chronicle, ABC 1, this record mentions that Shalmaneser V ravaged Samaria. Biblical records, in 2 Kings, Shalmaneser V is described as the one who besieged Samaria for 3 years after the last Israelite king, Hoshea, withheld tribute. However, since Shalmaneser died in 722 BCE, the same year Samaria fell, there has been historical debate over whether he or his successor, Sargon II, completed the conquest. Tiglath-Pileser III reigned 745 to 727 BCE. Tiglath-Pileser III initiated the conquest of Israel, with multiple campaigns that subjugated Israel, and began the process of deporting its population. Early campaigns and tribute. During his campaign in 738 BCE, Tiglath-Pileser III's annals list Menahem of Samaria as one of the kings who paid tribute, confirming the biblical account in 2 Kings. The Syro-Ephraimite War in 733 to 732 BCE, Tiglath-Pileser III responded to an alliance between Israel's king Pekah and the king of Damascus. Assyrian annals and reliefs confirm the subsequent campaign, which resulted in the deportation of the Israelite population from Galilee and Gilead. Installation of a vassal king. After the assassination of Pekah, Tiglath-Pileser III claimed in his inscriptions that he installed Hoshea as king of Israel. Black obelisk of Shalmaneser III reigned 858 to 824 BCE. Although occurring more than a century before the final conquest of Israel, this monument records an early phase of the conflict. The obelisk depicts King Jehu of Israel bringing tribute to Shalmaneser III, evidence of an earlier period of Israelite subjugation to Assyria. Assyrian imperial records. Assyrian records clearly document the campaign against the northern kingdom of Israel and the deportation of its population. Annals of Sargon II. The conquest is explicitly described in the annals of the Assyrian king Sargon II, who came to power shortly after the final siege began. In his inscriptions, Sargon boasted of conquering Samaria, the Israelite capital. Nimrud Prism. An inscription on this prism from Sargon II confirms the event in detail. He claimed to have besieged and conquered Samaria, and to have carried off 27,290 inhabitants. The Assyrians then repopulated the area with people from other parts of their empire, a common imperial strategy to prevent rebellion. Propaganda. Assyrian kings would often claim credit for military actions initiated by their predecessors. It is possible Sargon II took credit for the conquest, started by Shalmaneser V, who laid siege to Samaria for 3 years before his death. Biblical account. The Hebrew Bible also describes the Assyrian conquest and its aftermath in detail, largely corroborating the Assyrian records from a different perspective. 2 Kings 17, this chapter provides a detailed biblical narrative of the event, explaining that Israel was conquered because King Hoshea had stopped paying tribute and sought an alliance with Egypt. Deportation. The biblical account specifies the lands to which the Israelites were exiled, confirming that they were taken to Assyria.